For the championship, last corner.
The winner takes it all here in BSB. There was a bump there from Kyle. Tommy's coming as well. It's going to be a run to the line. Prize Wells, here it goes. Kyle Wright is the BSB champ.
Unbelievable.
What you just watched was the final lap of the 2024 British Superbike Championship. It came down to literally the final lap of the final race between the defending championship, Tommy Bridwell on the red Honda, and the up-and-comer Kyle Wright on the blue Yamaha. This was an absolutely phenomenal race and a phenomenal championship as well. I cannot even begin to explain how exciting this is, and if you didn't get goosebumps watching just that first clip, I don't know what's wrong with you. Welcome back to the Caffeinated Cruiser. My name is JD, and today we're talking about what is wrong with MotoGP and why it's so boring, and what MotoGP can hopefully learn from the British Superbike Championship. So now that you saw what the British Superbike Championship is like, let me show you what MotoGP is like. Alright, all jokes aside, the championship and MotoGP in general is my favorite sport to watch. I love basketball, I enjoy football, I enjoy a lot of other sports, but I cannot get enough of motorcycle racing. And week after week, Sunday after Sunday, I come back to MotoGP. So even though it has been a neck-and-neck championship in 2024, and it is between defending world champion Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin, who was the runner-up last year, it has still been absolutely astoundingly boring. I went back and I actually did some research for this video. Over the last 5 races, there has not been a first and second place finish in the full GP that has been less than 1 second. And I guess, yes, if you technically look at it, Australia was 0.997 seconds between Marquez and Martin. However, I'm going to round that up. That's a second. And going down in order, Thailand was a 2.9 second gap from Bagnaia to Martin. Australia was a 0.997 gap from Marquez to Martin. Japan was a 1.189 gap from Bagnaia to Martin. Indonesia was a 1.4 second gap from Martin to Acosta. Mazzano was a 5 second gap from Enea Bastianini to Martin. Now again, I know I'm only looking at the full GPs. I am not looking at the sprints in this, but you have to go all the way back to France, the 5th round of this season, to get anything that was under half a second in the main GP from first to second place. Again, I know there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. You know, there's people crash, mistakes happen, sometimes a rider's just unbelievably good, or there's weather or whatnot, but it still blows my mind that week after week, you just have these massive gaps. Nobody's racing, everyone's just driving in a line. The first lap, or the first 2 laps, are typically very entertaining, but outside of Pedro Acosta or Marc Marquez doing crazy things and trying to pass people, or Martin or Bagnaia messing up and crashing, there just is not a lot to keep you hooked to the race, and they honestly lull you to sleep. And I say that as someone who is a big fan of the sport and appreciates the individual riding ability of different people, the lesser known stories from people that maybe aren't at the front of the race. And I like watching the battles. I like watching the racecraft. But even so, it is so boring most of the time. So why is MotoGP so boring? And it really comes down to a couple of things. One is the aero, the wings, the spoilers, everything on the bikes created to make downforce. It makes the bikes punch a really weird hole in the air, and bikes following them, it is very hard to stay in that slipstream and have any sort of control, or to have downforce or to pass or anything else. If you've watched any recent MotoGP races, there were several instances where one rider passes another, and then the following rider gets sucked into the slipstream behind them, and then either ended in a crash or almost ends in a crash. And that's very dangerous. But it also means that the racing typically is very boring. One of the big things about racing, and one of the ways that cars and bikes go fast in a straight line, is to trail behind someone else and to have that person in front of them punch through the air. And if you can't utilize that, how do you end up passing when you have very similar spec bikes, or if you just don't have a ton more horsepower than the person in front of you? The other big problem that MotoGP has right now is the ride height devices. As MotoGP bikes leave the starting line, the suspension is compressed fully and it drops all the way down. And it does that to try to keep the front wheel on the ground because bikes move faster in a straight line when both wheels are on the ground rather than when it wheelies. But that being said, there's often times where riders, they're not able to brake hard enough so that that front ride height will release, and they end up riding around with no suspension for a lap or two until they can get up enough speed and brake into a corner hard enough to release it. And on the other side of it, when they exit out of corners, they typically drop that rear ride height device to put more downforce on the rear tires so it gets more grip and traction and can shoot them out of a corner. And on paper, that sounds really cool, but it ends up leading to very boring and very, for lack of a better term, slow racing. And again, these are not slow bikes. They're not doing slow things on them. You know, they're hitting well over 220 miles an hour on some of these tracks. And the movements that the riders make on the bikes to control them is just astounding to look at. Just the body control and the things they're able to make those bikes do at those speeds. However, it leads to racing that again is very processional and doesn't lead to a whole lot of passes or a lot of overtakes or even last lap battles. The last issue, and if you're at all following MotoGP, this issue has been beat to death, but the tire pressure rules. There are certain rules that state at what range the tire pressure should be at for the given race. And if a rider falls below it for too long or above it for too long, they are penalized and they can either have to drop a place or drop a position or take a long lap penalty. And again, I know MotoGP is aware of this. I'm saying all of this on the cusp of the 2027 rule revisions where most of the ride height devices, as far as I'm aware, are going to be banned. Most of the aero or a lot of the aero is going to be trimmed down. That is right now the only hope we have for MotoGP becoming honestly interesting and a captivating sport again. And again, I say that as someone who still watches it and still loves it, but yet also can see why it might be boring to someone who isn't on the inside, or maybe someone who doesn't ride a motorcycle. The reason MotoGP is so exciting is not necessarily the technology, but it is what the riders are able to do with that technology and how close the races can be and how much of a battle it is. Nobody has fun watching a race where someone finishes a mile ahead of someone else, or even for that matter, watching a basketball game and one team's getting blown out by 70 points. You know, there it might be exciting to be the person winning, but nobody's really paying that much attention to it, and it becomes something that's just kind of noise you put on in the background. And I honestly think MotoGP deserves better than that. I think it is one of the best sports that's out there, and I think it has a unique ability to capture people's imagination. That is basically my gripe for today. Long story short, watch motorcycle racing. It's awesome. Watch British Superbikes, watch World Superbike, watch Moto America, and also watch MotoGP. Each one is unique in what it offers. Each one has different types of racing. There's some entertainment to be had with each one of those. The only thing that I want to come from this is just to make it known that MotoGP deserves better and MotoGP fans deserve better. And I'm desperately hoping that 2027 solves the issues that we currently have with MotoGP. And if it does, I will be so excited. MotoGP has some of the most amazing and most talented riders on earth, and I want to see those riders fight like what we saw with Tommy Bridwell and Kyle Ryde. Thanks so much for watching. Keep two wheels down. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.